Well, a blonde was talking to her friend that she'd got a photo in the mail from one of those speeding cameras. You know when you go through the red light and they take your picture in the windshield. And she said to her friend, "I'm sending it right back. It's way too expensive and it's a really bad photo." Works for me. Well, we're completing our series, as Marty said, today on Prosperity's 10 Commandments from the book of the same title, Prosperity's 10 Commandments by Georgiana Tree West. And I think it's true that we all desire to live our best lives and improve our consciousness, and to improve our consciousness of prosperity so that we can live and establish a consciousness of permanent prosperity. In the 10 Commandments, we have learned that there are states of consciousness that we want to develop if we're to live free and in plenty. As I was preparing this last lesson, I always try to touch the consciousness in me that's addressing the point of the message, as well as the spiritual principle. And I was reminded of a young woman had graduated from college, and she came to live with me in Nashville. I had known her as a young Youth of Unity. She'd come as an international student from Costa Rica, and since then she was at school in North Carolina. And she'd just graduated from college and landed a job in Nashville. And so she came to stay with me for a couple of weeks or however long while she was finding an apartment and getting settled and getting acclimated in her new job. So as we were talking and sharing, she needed an apartment, she needed a car. I had a friend who had sold cars privately. And so I took her over to meet him. And she's 23 years old, and so in order to qualify for a car, we were sitting there together, and Jeff said to her, "Well, how much money are you making?" And she stated her starting salary. And Jeff looked with surprise at me, and I don't know what the look was on my face, but she was making like 3 times as much as I was making after 40 years in my career. Her starting salary at age 23 was quite substantial. And I had to touch that inside of me. What was I feeling? I was glad for her. She was starting out in a new city with new friends and a new life and a new job, employing her skills in ways that were going to bless her life forever. So what was that in me that felt, what? What? Have I not done enough with my life? I mean, okay, I work in nonprofit. I went to rationalization, justification. Somehow I felt not enough. I felt I hadn't done enough. I hadn't invested wisely enough. All of a sudden, just all of that was there in front of me. It passed quickly, but it's those moments in consciousness that we touch that we feel, we can feel a shift. We feel something stirring in us. And I wrote in my notes here, I was in a state of something, state of consciousness, a state of something. And I felt this this little tiny tinge of wishing that maybe I hadn't done nonprofit and ministry, and maybe I should have been in the corporate world. And, but I was happy for her, and I love my life, and it's worked out in 1,000 beautiful, blessing ways. What I felt, though, was what Mrs. West describes in Prosperity's 10 Commandments as the 10th commandment, which is coveting, wishing I had something that someone else had. And we think we don't covet people's goods and things and possessions anymore, that we no longer need the rules of the physicality of the 10 Commandments. We know, most of us know, not to kill and not to steal and not to debase the name of God and all of that. But it's these more subtle aspects of consciousness that we want to work on in terms of the refinement of our soul. And so we've seen in this series the first 4 commandments have to do with right action toward God. But the last 6 have to do with right action toward ourselves and others. And all the commandments, Moses first emphasized, his purpose was to emphasize right physical action for the group of Israelites that he was leading out of Egypt, to organize them and to keep order. But we know now that these 10 commandments are more than rules of action, that they are inner states of consciousness that we want to develop. We want to develop them to gain mastery of our lives. And so our 10th and final commandment is, you shall not covet your neighbor's house, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or male or female slave, or ox, or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. Now, in the old world, in ancient times, whenever they were doing a thou shalt not, they always stacked on a whole bunch of stuff. Not the wife, not the husband, not the slave, not the donkey, not the chickens, not the, not the stuff, not the possessions, so that they were clear, and they felt that they were clear and certain that the people could understand it. But you shall not covet also deals with the inner realm of the mind, our states of consciousness. How do we covet in mind? And Mrs. West says, in our ignorance of God's law, we may see the fulfillment of our desires in the possession of another person and suffer under the illusion that another has what we want. But she says this is not true, for only God has what we want, and God delivers it to us by the call of our faith. By the call of our faith. We learned in You Shall Not Steal, our good is ours by right of consciousness, and no one can take or keep our good from us. That we create in consciousness the very experiences, possessions, everything in life. So we're not, by this commandment, to covet our neighbor's possessions. Much of the negativity in the world is caused by wanting something we don't have that someone else does have, right? Their job, their mate, their garden, vegetables, whatever it is. When we use good judgment, we never fall into the mistake of believing that we can fulfill our heart's desires by taking what someone else has. And I would say we're not so much about taking, but about getting what they have, getting an equivalent, competing to get an equivalent of what they have. We know that that action is based in fear and scarcity and the lack of understanding that God has limitless, as Marty said in his meditation, God has limitless spiritual substance that we form and shape by our mind and by our thought and by our spoken word. And I'd offer up to you that when you have that little tinge of, I wish I had that, or I wish my life was like that, that's not necessarily a negative thing. It's a revelation from Spirit that all of this and more is ready and waiting for you. And I always call it's like a drop down or a download that you can that this is ready for you. You don't need what that person has. It's in you, or you couldn't feel it or have an awareness of it. It's in you already. So your work then is not to be jealous of it or envious of it or in a state of whatever about it. Your work is to turn within, connect with the one presence, power, and love, and create that very thing for your life. And it'll come to you in a way that's exactly right for your life. Because if you had that, whatever it is that someone else has, and took it for yourself, it wouldn't be as perfect a match for you as what the infinite intelligence of Spirit can create for you out of your own relationship in consciousness. The remedy for covetousness, which is a hard word to say in public speaking, is the spiritual principle of faith. Belief in divine supply. Belief in God's omnipresent, everywhere present goodness, and that in our faith, which is an idea in the mind of God, that we form our desires according to the pattern that we give our thoughts, and then those things are created in our lives. And so when we know this, there's nothing about anybody else's stuff that we could want. We only want our own stuff. Faith is the necessary condition of mind, Mrs. West says, permitting God's energy to move in our lives. And it's only disrupted when we transfer it to wanting what somebody else has. You can't have that because their consciousness created that. You can only have what your consciousness creates for your life. And it's through our faith, she says, the equivalent of our neighbor's good can appear in our own lives. It may not be identical in appearance, but it will be the same good adapted to our needs in a way that brings us the greatest joy. So if we see something that someone else has and we like it, that's a trigger that we can just appreciate it. And of course, appreciation and praise is an accelerating, magnifying energy. We can appreciate it. We don't have to wish that we had it or that we could take it from them. It's just fine. We don't have to live in a consciousness of envy or jealousy. It's a flag that you don't want to live in that. And here's the spiritual law that you want to remember. When you see something that someone else has and it's just so marvelous, you can tell yourself, no one has anything that doesn't come directly from God. God is the source of everything. And the only way God can get your good into your life is through your consciousness, not through someone else's. God's supply is infinite, and the very thing that our neighbor has, God has an infinite amount of, right? God can't run out of stuff because it's all created in divine substance, and God will be glad to give it to you and me if we furnish the consciousness through which it can come. Open and receptive to the Spirit of God. When this is understood, we don't need any longer to covet. We're happy for our neighbor's good fortune because we see it as just evidence of God's unlimited supply for their life and know that that same abundance could be ours for the accepting and allowing of its flow in our life. Now, you may say, well, that's obvious that we don't covet things anymore, and you may say, we're a civilized lot and we don't go about thinking about, I'm smart enough to know and evolved enough to know that I know I don't have to take that from somebody, that I can get my own. But this is where that refinement of consciousness is so important for us to look at the ways, that we want to evolve spiritually and advance. So I have to say, have you heard someone say they work in a small company and the management position opens up? There's only one. The only chance for advancement or promotion is to get that position. And they want it. They covet it. They go after it. They're qualified for it. You see, they're coveting that, thinking in a limited way, that's the only way they can get their good, is to have that position and stay with that company that they've worked maybe for 15 years. But if it was just stirring in them to have a promotion, to do a larger work in a larger way, why not create that in consciousness and let God bring the higher job, the right job, the job that fit them most perfectly? Because that management job may not be right for them. They may be better at graphic design and want to advance their career in a more artistic way. But they're, that I've been at this company 15 years, I've got to make more money, this is the only way I can do it, I'm going to have to take management, supervise people and personnel, and I don't care because I need that. They're coveting that. Have you heard people say, he's the only one I could love. I could never love another. I have to have him. He's not available right now. But I'll wait. We covet space. I can only sleep on the left side of the bed. Sounds silly, but try to sleep on the right side of the bed and feel all that discomfort, right? Get out, get up to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, you have no idea where you are. You're coveting the space. We covet time. I can't do that for you. I've got all this other stuff to do. We covet things in ways, we have this coveting consciousness that we just want to be sensitive to. It's not good, it's not, I don't want to say it's not bad, but it's an awareness of how we clutch things or hang on to things that maybe if we just had a little more open hand might allow a greater good to flow into our life. We may see our neighbor's new car or latest iPhone or new boat, and we don't actually want that or those things, but we may covet the supply, the financial flow of income that makes those things possible. You know, we go home and we drive home to our little space, and on the way home we drive past or through a neighborhood with large, big, attractive, beautiful homes, and we covet the supply that created that for those people, right? And it may not be that we want that big home, but we want the joy or the knowledge or the education or the personality or the influence or the impact or the money that created that experience. We covet that. I wish I had that. I wish I had that in that way. Are you with me? And so we think we've advanced through this, but maybe we haven't. I'm only inviting you this morning to take a look. Take a look. We think we don't covet when we say things like, that's the only position up for promotion. I want it. I'm qualified for it. It's my dream job. I should have it. You may or may not get it. But you have within you the spiritual power to create and trust that the right position is there for you. One that you're most well suited to. One that will work exactly right for you. So we want to let the feeling of covetousness stir the true desires in our hearts and recognize that that's just something bigger and more expansive and more profound that God is trying to break out through you, in and through your life. Faith is the starting point. The hidden truth in this commandment is that we are to cease limiting ourselves by desiring what belongs to another and to create instead what we want for our lives ourselves. That we take those inklings as subtle nuances and signposts along the way that something more is ready for us, and we claim our own. Mrs. West interprets this commandment: you shall not limit yourself by coveting that which is another's, you'll claim your own. And I'd say you'll create your own. You'll claim and create your own. God's supply is infinite, and to envy someone else that has a better position or more of anything is to deny your own connection with God and your own creative capacity to move and live and have your being in spirit. Mrs. West says this is kind of alarming. Even if coveting never leads you to take anything that does not belong to you, coveting, envy, jealousy undermine and ultimately rot your soul. Yikes. Thank you for that. She said this state of consciousness shuts you off from God. Why? Because to covet something means you do not understand that you cannot steal. You do not understand that whatever you are getting in your life or not getting in your life is an outpicturing of your own consciousness. Nobody can take or keep your good from you. So it's your state of consciousness that puts you in that large, grand house or that great job, or walking on the street in health and plenty, or walking on the street in illness and lack. It's your consciousness, we say here every week. It's your consciousness, our consciousness, that rules our life. So when someone else is in possession of something that you want, it's very nice and desirable, say, that's fine. Admire it, and then she says, say to yourself, I am in touch with the source of that. Because I can see it. I can see that grandeur and that glory and that beauty and that prosperity. I'm in touch with the source of that. God's supply is inexhaustible, and I can have the same or better. Pretty nice way to say it, isn't it? And you can be sure it's better, she says, because what fits the other person would not suit you exactly. If you took it from him, it wouldn't fit. But the thing you get from God is exactly right for you. So as we close our 10 Commandments, we recognize, I want to give a little summary, that they're a roadmap to build not only a consciousness of prosperity, which is the theme that Mrs. West has used, but they're to evolve us in spiritual understanding in ways that can change our lives for the better forever. We've seen in our series, as I said in the opening, that the first 4 commandments have to do with right action toward God, and that the last 6 have to do with right action toward others, and ourselves included in that others. All of those were first emphasized by Moses as right physical action, but we know now they're more than just rules of physical action. They are inner states of consciousness. And as we integrate them into our way of living and being and doing, they're going to deliver to us one of the promises in Deuteronomy that I love. It's Deuteronomy chapter 28, verses 11 and 12. The Lord will make you abound in prosperity. The Lord will open for you his rich storehouse, the heavens, to bless all your undertakings. So as we think about that, the Lord will open his rich storehouse for us. One presence, one power. You shall love the Lord your God. You shall have no other gods before me. One presence, one power, one love, the allness of everything. If we don't follow any other commandment, that first one is to turn to God in every way, every time, every condition, no exceptions. To make no idols out of anything other than God, and to let God work in and through us to work out all the conditions of our lives. When we hear we should not kill, it's more than not taking a life. We don't want to kill our dreams. We don't want to kill someone's reputation. We don't want to live in a destroyer consciousness. When we hear to not commit adultery, we know we're not to adulterate our own consciousness by turning to anything other than the absolute truth of our being in God. When we hear not to steal, it confirms, as we said, that you can't get something for nothing, that your good is yours by right of consciousness, and no one can take or keep your good from you, and you can't take anyone else's. To not lie, to not bear false witness, means that we shall tell the truth about who we are and whose we are. Children of the Most High. And to live in accord with that, to not adulterate that and not bear false witness to that. And lastly, as we said today, to not covet is to learn to claim our own from the one divine source of all supply, from the spiritual substance of the Christ. So I want to close with Mrs. West gives a summary of the 10 commandments in her own words, and I want it to be a prayer for us. So I invite you to think about your life and the evolution of your consciousness. You are here because you are awake and alive to the truth of God in you. And we're here on purpose and on task to being more of spirit in the world, an instrument of spirit in the world. And so just think about your life, and let's take a minute and turn within. And I'll read her summary of the 10 Commandments as we close. She says, number 1, I look only to God for my prosperity. So feel after that in your life. I look only to God for my prosperity. 2, I make no mental images of lack. There's no lack of money, no lack of health, no lack of time, no lack of friends, no lack of love. I make no mental images of lack. Number 3, I speak no word of limitation. I am enough. Number 4, I let go and let God work in my affairs. Let thy will be done. Number 5, I deal honorably with God and all of God's instruments of supply in my life. Number 6, I keep my wealth circulating wisely. As I give, so shall I receive. And I recognize that giving is the first half of the law, but fulfillment and receiving is the second half. I keep my wealth circulating wisely. Number 7, I use my wealth for good purposes only. Number 8, I never strive to get something for nothing. Everything in my life has value and purpose. Number 9, I never talk poverty. I tell the truth about me and God's abundance. God's abundance in my life, God's abundance flowing in and through me. And number 10, I take my eye off my neighbor's wealth and I create and claim my own. In these affirmations, we have the essence of Prosperity's 10 commandments. Rightly lived, they will deliver the rich promise of the Deuteronomy. The Lord will make you abound in prosperity. The Lord will open for you His rich storehouse, the heavens, to bless all your undertakings. And so we know this and we give thanks for this truth. May these 10 ideas be integrated in us more fully and more profoundly. Let our minds be one with the mind of God in understanding the subtleties of how we can live these more fully, more truthfully, more joyfully, and be blessed. Be blessed. Thank you, God. Amen.